In the final book Marilyn Monroe ever read, dated 3 weeks before her passing, she underlined a single phrase and wrote one word beside it, "finally." Nobody understood what she meant until they discovered 412 books filled with her handwriting, secret notebooks with poetry about despair and cobwebs, and the truth about 2 morning hours she fought her entire life to protect. Every detail you're about to hear is documented, and none of it matches the Marilyn Monroe you were taught to believe in. Reading Ulysses at the playground eve, Arnold arrived at that playground in Amagansett, Long Island, camera in hand. What she captured would become one of the most iconic and controversial images of Marilyn Monroe, not because of what the actress was wearing, but because of what she was reading. There, seated on children's playground equipment, completely absorbed, Marilyn held a copy of James Joyce's Ulysses in her hands, the book that literary scholars spent entire careers trying to understand, the book that defeated graduate students with its stream of consciousness prose, its layers of illusion, its deliberate difficulty, 730 pages of the densest, most challenging fiction ever written in the English language. The photograph spread through newspapers and magazines. The reaction was immediate and cruel. Cynics dismissed it as publicity. Columnists made jokes. One writer suggested she was holding the book upside down. The idea that Marilyn Monroe, Hollywood's premier glamour icon, was genuinely reading one of the most demanding novels in the English language seemed absurd to many observers. She was a blonde in a bathing suit, they said. She belonged on a movie poster, not inside the pages of high modernism, but Eve Arnold knew better. Marilyn kept Ulysses in her car. Arnold later explained she had been working her way through it for a long time. This wasn't a prop. This was a book Marilyn returned to, struggled with, and refused to abandon. Arnold had watched her read it on multiple occasions, between takes, during breaks, in the backseat of cars on the way to shoots. The photograph at the playground simply happened to be the moment Arnold had her camera ready. She loved the sound of Joyce's prose. She would read it aloud to herself, letting the rhythms wash over her, trying to make sense of the complex narrative through voice and repetition. Her method wasn't that of a literature professor dissecting meaning. It was instinctive, sensual, deeply personal. She treated the words like music, something to be felt before it was understood. She discovered Joyce at age 26 during a period when she was questioning everything about her career and her public image. The discovery felt like finding a secret language, something that belonged to her alone. She even performed extracts from Molly Bloom's famous Stream of Consciousness soliloquy, that 45-page run-on sentence that closes the novel, perhaps the most daring piece of prose in modernist literature. She would speak the words aloud in her apartment, alone, giving voice to a character whose unfiltered inner life mirrored the one Marilyn was never allowed to show in public. In her morning hours, when Hollywood still slept, Marilyn would read Joyce aloud, approaching Ulysses the way a musician might approach a difficult score, through repetition, voice, and patience. She didn't need to understand every allusion. She needed to feel the language move through her, and that was enough to keep her coming back, page after page, month after month. The photograph at Amagansett wasn't staged. It was evidence of a hidden intellectual life that contradicted everything the public believed about Marilyn Monroe. But here's the question no one could answer in 1955. Was Ulysses an isolated attempt to appear intellectual? Or was there something more, something the world had completely missed? The answer wouldn't surface for another 4 decades, and when it did, it didn't just surprise people, it rewrote the entire story. The Secret Library of 400 Books, 1999. 37 years after Marilyn's passing, Christie's auction house in New York prepared to sell her estate. Archivists and catalogers worked methodically through her belongings, the dresses, the jewelry, the personal effects. Then they reached her bookshelves, and everything stopped. What they found shocked everyone who examined the inventory. 412 books: philosophy, psychology, theology, poetry, American literature alongside European classics, Dostoevsky, Freud, Beckett, Hemingway, Fitzgerald. Poetry by E. Cummings and Carl Sandburg. Books about Goya's art and Abraham Lincoln's life. Not a scattered handful of bestsellers. A library. A real, substantial, deeply personal library that defied every public expectation of who Marilyn Monroe had been. Think about that for a moment. 412 books. How many have you read in your lifetime? These weren't decorator books arranged by a studio publicist. The volumes showed signs of genuine use, Pencil marks in the margins, notations in her handwriting, pages worn from repeated reading. On nights when she had nothing to do, she would wander the Pickwick bookstore on Hollywood Boulevard. "I just open books at random," she said, "or when I come to a page or a paragraph I like, I buy that book." Not because critics praised them, because something in the prose resonated with her own inner experience. She described the feeling of discovering a book that spoke to her as almost physical, a jolt of recognition, as if the author had somehow reached across time and understood something she'd never been able to articulate herself. She didn't read to impress anyone. She read because the alternative, sitting alone with her own thoughts and no guide through them, was unbearable. "It takes a smart brunette to play a dumb blonde," she'd once said. Her shelves revealed a woman who'd built a university in her bedroom and attended it every morning before the world demanded she put on her costume. The Ulysses photograph wasn't an anomaly. It was simply the one moment when a camera caught her in the act of being herself. But hidden in that library was a book that would make even Joyce seem tame. A banned novel Fox executives would have fired her for owning. But here's what makes the catalog heartbreaking. This woman with 412 books, this woman who clearly hungered for knowledge, she'd never finished high school. The studios never let her forget it. They saw her as a body, a face, a presence on screen. They never imagined she might want to understand Botticelli or read Dante. So how did a woman with no diploma build a library that would embarrass most college graduates? She tried the traditional route first, and what happened next nearly broke her. If you're discovering a side of Marilyn Monroe you never knew existed, subscribe to see what other Golden Age stars were hiding in plain sight. The education Hollywood tried to kill. Before her face became so famous that anonymity was impossible, Marilyn Monroe quietly enrolled in evening courses at UCLA, literature and art history. She would slip into classrooms after her studio obligations ended, sit alongside regular students, study Renaissance art, take notes, complete assignments. She studied Botticelli's Birth of Venus, a painting about a goddess emerging from the sea, impossibly beautiful, impossibly vulnerable. It's hard not to wonder what Marilyn thought when she looked at that image. A woman defined by her beauty, created by forces beyond her control, presented to the world as a symbol rather than a person. The parallels must have been impossible to ignore. For a brief period, she experienced what she'd been denied as a child, the chance to be a student, to pursue knowledge for its own sake, to raise her hand and ask a question without someone judging whether she had the right to ask it. One professor later said she'd been his most engaged student that semester. Always prepared, always asking questions that showed she'd thought deeply about the material. She sat in the front row. She stayed after class to continue discussions. She did this after working 12-hour days on set. Then her fame grew too large. Whispers spread through the lecture halls. Students stopped paying attention to the professor and started staring at the blonde in the third seat. Other students couldn't concentrate. Professors found their lectures disrupted. The very thing she'd worked so hard to achieve, recognition, became the thing that locked her out of the one place she wanted to be. The door to formal education closed just as she was beginning to discover how much she loved learning. She never talked about it publicly, but the people close to her said the loss stayed with her for years. She would sometimes mention UCLA in passing, the way someone mentions a relationship that ended too soon. Not with bitterness, but with a quiet ache for what might have been. What the studios never understood was that Marilyn's desire for education wasn't about prestige or credentials. She didn't want a degree to hang on her wall. She wanted what education promised at its best, the chance to understand herself and the world she lived in. She'd grown up in foster homes and orphanages where no one asked what she thought about anything. UCLA was the first place that did, and then it was taken away, but losing UCLA didn't stop her. It forced her to become more resourceful. She would build her own curriculum. She would choose her own professors, Joyce, Beckett, Whitman, Heine, Rilke, and authors whose names would shock Hollywood's moral guardians. She would create an intellectual life so substantial that formal education might have actually constrained it. But first, she needed a different kind of school, one that would connect her love of reading to her craft as an actress, one that would teach her to mine her own emotional experience and transform it into art. And when she announced where she was going, Hollywood executives didn't just disapprove, they tried to destroy her, not because they cared about her education, because they knew what she was planning would destroy their control over her forever. Method acting as morning study. In 1955, Marilyn Monroe made a decision that stunned Hollywood. She left California and moved to New York City. She walked away from her contract, from the studio system, from everything that had made her famous. And she enrolled at the Actors Studio under Lee Strasberg, the most famous and controversial acting teacher in America. When Fox executives discovered she was serious, they threatened her. They reminded her what happened to stars who got difficult. They suggested her career would be over if she walked away. They told her she was replaceable, that there were 100 blonde actresses waiting in line behind her, and every single one of them would show up on time. She walked away anyway. On the day Marilyn Monroe walked into the Actors Studio, she wasn't just enrolling in an acting program. She was declaring war, and she had a secret weapon they'd never see coming: 400 books worth of ammunition. Marlon Brando had studied under Strasberg, James Dean, Montgomery Clift. These were actors who transformed American cinema with their intensity and psychological realism. And now Marilyn was sitting among them, not as a visitor, but as a student who filled notebooks with observations, techniques, and reminders to herself. She also studied physical mechanics under Michael Chekhov, learning how the body could express emotion without words, how the angle of a shoulder could convey defeat, how the tilt of a head could suggest longing, how stillness itself could become the most powerful gesture on screen. She practiced these techniques in her apartment, in front of mirrors, alone. The discipline was invisible to everyone but her. Her notebooks contained directives like this one, written in her own hand. Stop trying to be perfect. Perfect is lifeless. Be alive instead. And this one. When you can't remember your lines, remember your pain. She was teaching herself not just to act, but to transform her trauma into art. In one entry, she crystallized her philosophy: the truth can only be recalled, never invented. In another, she challenged the entire Hollywood system that had created her. This is supposed to be an art form, not just a manufacturing establishment. An actor is supposed to be a sensitive instrument. That phrase, sensitive instrument, revealed how she saw herself and her craft, not as a product to be packaged and sold, but as an artist with depth, with complexity, with something meaningful to express. The studios wanted a wind-up doll who hit her marks and smiled on cue. Marilyn was building something far more dangerous, an actress who felt everything and hid nothing. Her technique for reading Ulysses aloud, using voice, rhythm, and repetition to unlock meaning, resembled Strasberg's emphasis on finding the emotional truth in language. You can hear the difference in her performance in Bus Stop, the first film she made after studying Joyce. Her line readings had a new rhythm, a syncopation that critics couldn't explain but audiences felt. One reviewer noted she'd somehow become more present on screen, as if she'd learned to listen not just to other actors, but to some internal music the rest of us couldn't hear. She studied acting with the same seriousness that scholars brought to their doctoral dissertations, and she protected the time she needed to do that work, which is where the story takes its most unexpected turn. Because the thing Hollywood hated most about Marilyn Monroe, it was the very thing that made all of this possible. The 2-hour awakening. Which brings us to perhaps the most misunderstood aspect of Marilyn Monroe's professional life. Her reputation for lateness, for being difficult, for making directors wait. Co-stars made jokes about Marilyn time, that mysterious temporal dimension where she seemed to operate independently of clocks and schedules. Studio executives complained bitterly. Directors vented their anger to the press. The narrative hardened into Hollywood gospel. Marilyn Monroe was unprofessional, ungrateful, impossible to work with. But nobody asked the obvious question: what was she doing during those hours? In her private world, Marilyn described herself as having a languorous disposition. She would take up to 2 hours to fully wake in the morning, 2 hours spent luxuriating in every last moment of drowsiness. To Hollywood, it confirmed everything they believed. She was lazy, undisciplined, unable to function like a professional. The reality was something entirely different. That slow, deliberate awakening was a psychological buffer, a rejection of the studio system that wanted to own every minute of her day. The studios operated on a factory model. Actors arrived early, spent hours in makeup and wardrobe, stood under hot lights for 12 or 14 hours, then returned the next morning to do it all again. No space for reflection. No space for the kind of preparation that method acting required. Marilyn refused to surrender completely. Those 2 morning hours belonged to her. She'd warm milk on a hot plate, whip in 2 raw eggs for a high-protein breakfast, a recipe so strange her housekeeper thought she was ill. She maintained a 10-minute routine, lifting 5-pound weights to preserve what she called her muscular firmness, not vanity, but the physical strength she needed to stand under studio lights for 14 hours without collapsing. But more importantly, those hours created mental space. Space to read Joyce, space to practice method exercises Strasberg had taught her, space to journal, to think, to prepare psychologically for the performance ahead. Sometimes she would take long baths during these hours, her skin layered with Vaseline, maintaining the luminous quality that cameras loved. Even this wasn't vanity. It was maintenance of her instrument, the same way a violinist protects their hands or a singer protects their voice. When Billy Wilder demanded she arrive at 5 a.m. for makeup, she said no. When Fox threatened to fine her for tardiness, she paid the fines and kept reading. When they docked her salary, she absorbed the cost without complaint. Those morning hours cost her money, cost her reputation, cost her friendships, but they bought her something priceless. 2 hours a day when Marilyn Monroe didn't exist, when only Norma Jean and her books remained. Consider what she accomplished in those hours over the course of a career. 2 hours a day, 5 or 6 days a week, for more than a decade. That's thousands of hours of reading, writing, and intellectual preparation. Thousands of hours with Joyce and Beckett and Whitman and Heine. Thousands of hours building the internal architecture that made her performances so compelling. The depth that audiences could feel even when they couldn't name it. The studio saw wasted time. Marilyn was building a cathedral inside herself, one morning at a time. Which part of Marilyn's morning routine surprised you most? The Joyce, the method acting, or something else? And which other Golden Age star's hidden life should we explore next? Let us know in the comments, because what she was actually reading in those hours is darker than anything you'd expect, and one man tried to humiliate her for it, Beckett and the existential void. Now that she had time, now that she had method training, now that she had her library of 400 books, what did she actually read in those protected morning hours? Arthur Miller, the intellectual playwright she'd marry in 1956, once made a cruel observation. He said he'd never seen her finish a book, only Colette's Cherie. It was a lie, or perhaps denial, because the truth was more threatening to Miller than he could admit. His wife was reading the same books he was, understanding them just as deeply, and he couldn't handle it. The great American playwright had married what he thought was a beautiful blank canvas. Instead, he'd married a woman who could argue Beckett with him and win. While Hollywood cast her in roles celebrating American optimism, Marilyn's private reading list told a different story. During the exact years when she was being celebrated as Hollywood's most desirable woman, she owned a copy of Samuel Beckett's The Unnameable, perhaps the darkest novel of the 20th century, a voice questioning whether existence itself has any validity. "I can't go on, I'll go on," the novel famously concludes. That single sentence, that tension between impossibility and necessity, became something she carried with her. When Miller discovered she was reading Beckett, he mocked her. "Too difficult for you," he suggested. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She simply kept reading, the way she always did when someone underestimated her, quietly, patiently, until the evidence spoke for itself. When a reporter once asked her what she was reading, she said Beckett. The reporter laughed. He actually laughed in her face, certain the beautiful blonde was performing again. The room went quiet. She looked at him steadily and recited the closing line from memory. "I can't go on, I'll go on." The laughter stopped, because everyone in that room knew exactly what Marilyn Monroe couldn't go on from and exactly why she had to go on anyway. Her morning reading hours became a space where she could acknowledge darkness without the world demanding she smile through it. Without studio executives telling her to be grateful, without directors insisting she perform happiness on command. The same woman who performed Molly Bloom's central soliloquy from Joyce could also sit with Beckett's void. She contained multitudes, and her mornings were where she allowed all of them to coexist. But Marilyn didn't just consume other people's words about darkness. She wrote her own. And what she put on paper was so raw, so unguarded, that it took nearly 50 years before anyone had the courage to publish it. The poetry she wrote in secret. In her most private moments, Marilyn didn't just read about existential despair. She wrote about it. And she never showed Miller her poetry. She knew he'd either dismiss it or worse, try to edit it, try to improve it, try to make it his. These fragments were hers alone. In 2010, decades after her passing, a collection called Fragments was published. Marilyn Monroe's private notebooks, Her handwritten poems, journal entries, notes to herself, material she'd never intended for public eyes. The editors had debated for years whether to release such private, unguarded pain. In the end, they decided the world needed to see who Marilyn Monroe really was, not who Hollywood had told them she was. Marilyn Monroe didn't just read poetry, she wrote it. Raw, morning excavations of her inner world. She used writing. The editors of Fragments noted as a tool to sort through her often tumultuous emotional life. In one undated poem, she wrote, "Life, I am of both of your directions. Life, somehow remaining hanging downward the most but strong as a cobweb in the wind." A cobweb in the wind, something delicate, nearly invisible, yet possessing a tensile strength that allows it to survive. Hanging downward the most suggests a pull toward darkness, yet strong insists on resilience, on survival against odds. It's not a polished poem, it's not trying to be, it's a woman reaching for language to describe what it feels like to be her, and finding it imperfectly but honestly. She used her journals to confront inner demons and past traumas directly. In one entry, she pledged to know reality and to work analytically on her phobias, no matter how painful. In another, she reminded herself, "Don't let anyone make you feel you don't deserve what you want." Reading Joyce and Beckett and writing poetry weren't escapes from reality. They were methods of facing reality more completely than the world of Hollywood pretense allowed. In another fragment, she confessed, "Oh heavens, I wish that I were no longer here, absolutely non-existent, gone away from here." No metaphor, no poetic distance, just the raw acknowledgement of wanting to cease existing. Written so plainly, it seemed like a thought she'd had so many times it no longer shocked her. In yet another entry, she wrote about the gap between who she was and who the world demanded she be. "I'm trying to find myself. Sometimes that's not easy." Simple words, but in the context of a woman whose image was owned by a studio, whose body was discussed by strangers, whose name was a brand before the word existed, those words carry the weight of someone fighting for their own existence. Not their physical existence, their real existence, the right to be a person, not a performance. These morning hours weren't just about intellectual growth. They were about survival, about using pen and paper to keep herself tethered to existence when the performance of Marilyn Monroe threatened to erase the real woman entirely. Every poem she wrote, every journal entry she scrawled was an act of resistance, proof that Norma Jean was still in there, still thinking, still fighting to exist beneath the platinum and the perfume. And then there were the nights, the long, sleepless, unforgiving nights. The hours when even poetry couldn't hold the darkness at bay, when she'd reach for a different kind of companion entirely. 3 a.m. companions. Her struggles found voice through her writing, but in those same sleepless hours, she found unexpected companions who understood both anguish and beauty. Marilyn suffered from chronic insomnia throughout her adult life. Sleep became something she chased, but could rarely catch. She once told a friend that some nights she'd lie awake for hours, watching the ceiling, counting the minutes until she could reasonably get up and reach for a book without admitting total defeat. The pills didn't always work. The alcohol wore off. The silence of a Los Angeles night could be deafening when you were alone in it. But the books were always there, waiting on the nightstand. They didn't judge her. They didn't ask her to smile. They simply offered their pages and let her disappear into someone else's words for a while. Photographer Alfred Eisenstadt captured her one night at 3 a.m, curled up on a sofa bed in a borrowed nightgown, completely engrossed in the poetry of Heinrich Heine. No makeup, no performance, just exhaustion and poetry. The image is one of the most honest photographs ever taken of her. No studio lighting, no carefully arranged pose, just a woman alone with a book trying to make it through the night. When he asked why she wasn't sleeping, she said, "I'd rather be tired and awake than asleep and dreaming what I usually dream." She never explained what she dreamed, but anyone who'd read her Beckett collection could guess. She kept Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass close at hand. Its worn pages showed she'd returned to certain passages again and again. A poet who honored the body and the self may have spoken to a woman whose body had been celebrated by millions, but whose self remained largely invisible. Whitman wrote about containing contradictions, about being large enough to hold opposing truths at once. Marilyn lived that contradiction every day. Each of these writers gave her something different. In Whitman, she found permission to celebrate the body without shame, to insist that the physical and the intellectual were in opposites. Heine offered proof that melancholy and beauty could share the same breath. And the modernists completed the picture, Joyce revealing that language itself could be shattered and rebuilt, Beckett proving that staring into meaninglessness didn't have to mean surrendering to it. Insomnia, the curse that tormented her, became, in those quiet hours, an unexpected gift. When she couldn't sleep, she could read. When she couldn't perform, she could simply be. Gossip columnists called her pretentious when word leaked about the actor's studio. Co-stars rolled their eyes. Even some friends wondered if she was putting on airs, if the girl from the orphanage was playing dress-up with ideas she didn't really understand. But in those morning hours, surrounded by Whitman and Heine and Joyce and Beckett, Marilyn Monroe was never truly alone. Her library was her faculty. Her morning hours were her classroom. The poets and novelists on her shelves became the professors who understood her in ways that Hollywood never could. If this changed how you see Marilyn Monroe, share this with someone who still thinks she was just a pretty face. Because there's one final detail about those 400 books that nobody talks about, and it's the detail that changes everything. What they found in the margins. After Marilyn's passing in 1962, her library was dispersed. Some volumes went to auction. Some disappeared into private collections, but others ended up in the hands of the people closest to her, and what they found inside those books tells us something about her final months that cuts right through to the bone. In the margins of several books, not just Ulysses, but also her Beckett, her Whitman, her Heine, she'd written notes to herself, reminders, questions, arguments with the authors, sometimes just a single word, yes, or me, or always. In one copy of Leaves of Grass, she'd bracketed an entire stanza about loneliness and written in the margin, "This is the truest thing I've ever read." In another book, she'd circled a passage about the impossibility of being truly known by another person and drawn a small star beside it. And in one book, dated 3 weeks before her passing, she'd underlined a single phrase and written "finally" beside it. Nobody knows what the phrase was. The book has never been publicly identified. Nobody knows what she meant by "finally." Was it peace she'd found in those words? Was it understanding some truth she'd been chasing through 412 books and thousands of sleepless hours that had finally revealed itself? Was it resignation? Was it relief? The word sits there in her handwriting, unanswered, in the margin of a book that may no longer exist. One word, 7 letters, written by a woman 3 weeks away from the end of her story in the margins of someone else's. And perhaps that's the most Marilyn Monroe detail of all, a mystery written in pencil inside a book by a woman the world thought it knew completely. The world saw the blonde. The world saw the smile. The world saw exactly what it was told to see. But in the margins, in pencil, in her own handwriting, that's where the real Marilyn Monroe lived, and she's still there, waiting to be read. In the end, Miller wrote about her after she was gone. He turned her into a character in his play, After the Fall, tragic, unstable, barely literate. He gave her dialogue that made her sound simple. He stripped away the Beckett, the Whitman, the Joyce. He erased the woman who read Ulysses and wrote poetry and studied Renaissance art. He replaced her with a beautiful broken thing, easier to pity, easier to dismiss, easier to live with having failed. But we have the evidence Miller wanted to bury. 412 books, notebooks filled with poetry, photographs of her reading at playgrounds and on sofa beds at 3 a.m. Margin notes that prove she didn't just read those books, she fought with them, loved them, lived inside them. A single word in pencil, "finally," that he never saw and couldn't have understood. The truth he couldn't destroy. Those 2 hours every morning, the reading, the poetry, the slow awakening, they weren't enough to save her, but they were enough to show us who she really was. And that matters more than Hollywood ever understood. That's the truth the morning routine reveals. That's the woman who existed before Hollywood demanded its performance. That's Marilyn Monroe, reader, writer, student artist, claiming 2 hours of freedom in a world that wanted to own all of her. And in those 2 hours, she was magnificent. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed discovering this hidden side of Marilyn Monroe's life, there are so many more stories from Hollywood's golden age waiting to be told. Stories of remarkable women and men whose private lives were far more fascinating than their public images. Subscribe to the channel and hit that like button so we can keep uncovering the truth behind the glamour together. Until next time, may you find your own 2 hours of freedom, whatever that looks like for you.